A defining experience of rabbinical school is learning in chavruta, or partner study. As opposed to the way that the education system operates in the Western world, with individuals studying, writing papers, and taking tests all on their own, the Jewish world understands that people learn best when they debate and discuss with other people. Every chavruta, every pair of learners has their own way of operating, but the learning is best when each person brings ideas to the table and the dyads debates sharpen each other's skills like a knife on a whetstone. I remember a particularly important conversation with my chavruta Ora early on in our rabbinic studies. We were translating long passages of the book of Leviticus and repeatedly encountered the words with the root letters Kuf, Resh, and Bet. Every time we got to one such word, I would say, it means sacrifice, while Ora would say, it means to draw close, to draw near. We went back and forth, make a sacrifice versus approach. And you know what? We were both right. The word korban does mean to bring offerings, these offerings brought by the priest in the temple. However, the root also means to approach, a reference to the beliefs of the ancient Israelites that a sacrificial offering was meant to bring close, to bring together the people with God. Let's take a look again at the very first instance of this phenomena in this week's Torah portion. It begins with the beginning of the book of Vayikra el Moshe, Vayedeber Adonai elav me'ohel moed lemor. Adonai called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael ve'amarta alehem, Adam ki yakriv mikem, korban ladonai, min habehema, min habakar, umin hatzon, takrivu et korbanchem. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any of you presents an offering of cattle to Adonai, you shall choose your offering from the herd or from the flock. In our pasuk that I just read, we have this root word 4 times. Ki yakriv mikem, korban, and takrivu et korbanchem. So 4 times. And each year when we get to Leviticus, I wonder how to make relevant in our contemporary context this rule book for the priests filled with information about the proper ways to make different sacrificial offerings. But this early conversation with my chavruta points to Leviticus's relevance. Even though we no longer make animal sacrifices, and happily so, we can understand the ideology, the theology that underpins this system. The ancient Israelites wanted to get close to God. They wanted to strengthen their sense of community as they shared of their wealth with each other, with the priests running the temple and God. They believed that God wanted an offering with a reach nichoach, a pleasing odor. And when we think of the sacrifices as barbecue, the non-vegetarians among us can understand. The people, Yakriv, drew close with a korban, an offering. The God of Leviticus is also, upon further examination, much closer than you might think to a contemporary conception of God. The God of Genesis sends angels, or as I like to translate it, avatars, down to earth to mix with the people. These representatives of God met with Abraham in his tent and observed the goings-on in Sodom and Gomorrah. The God of Exodus speaks panim el panim, face to face with Moses, and causes the Israelites to prevail in battle against Amalek, while Moses holds up his hands. The God of the other books of Torah is directly involved with human affairs. And my son is joining us. Hello, Micah. I'm going to keep telling my story, but you can stand quietly with me if you want. He's going to upstage me. So the God of the other books of Torah is directly involved in human affairs. That God has feelings, anger, rage, and jealousy. But by contrast, the God that we see in the book of Leviticus is above and outside of the world of people. The God of Leviticus is not judgmental, but rather merely desires a world and human community that is in balance. Much like a nuclear reactor that requires an influx of cold water when it gets too hot, or vice versa, the God of Leviticus requires burnt offerings, meal offerings, and offerings of well-being. The God of Leviticus requires guilt offerings and sin offerings when people have done something wrong. But the word for sin offering, chatat, is not laden with the value judgments that we generally associate with the word sin. The word in Hebrew, chet, which we know so well from our High Holy Day liturgy, does not connote a moral failing. It is not dirty as in bad, but rather a system that is out of balance and is in need of a course correction. My favorite way to translate chet is the ways we have missed the mark. In a similar vein, in Leviticus chapter 5, we are instructed about the proper way to offer a guilt offering when a person has become tameh, or impure. Tameh does not mean impure, again, as in dirty, but is a value-neutral impure paired with a value-neutral pure. My favorite example of tumat, mate, which we also see in this Torah portion, is becoming impure after contact with a dead animal. I imagine one of our ancestors hiking and accidentally tripping over a dead squirrel. He has become impure and he may be grossed out, but there is nothing wrong with his soul. He must go to the temple and offer a chatat, a sin offering, so that the world, God, and the whole system will be back in balance. God is not judging him for his oops moment. God might not have even noticed. The God of Leviticus is above all of that and merely wants everything in the world to work as intended. If a correction needs to be made, God will happily accept a reach nichoach, an offering of a pleasing odor. One of the great teachers of Torah of our day, Rabbi Shai Held, has published 2 years' worth of Divrei Torah in a book entitled The Heart of Torah. He introduces Leviticus by comparing our first account of creation in Genesis chapter 1 with all of the dividing and separating with which Vayikra is so concerned. Rabbi Held never states this explicitly, but a literary historical analysis of the Bible understands that Genesis 1 and the whole book of Leviticus were authored by the same group of people who came from the same school of theology and thought, that of the priestly school, or the P source. Just as in Genesis 1, God is separating light from darkness, water from water, and dry land from water, in the book of Leviticus, God is separating kosher animals from non-kosher ones and detailing the proper procedures for sacrifices in the Mishkan, which is also known as the tabernacle and also known as the traveling sanctuary that presaged the temple in Jerusalem. At this point in our year, we are very familiar with the Mishkan, having spent the last several weeks at the end of the book of Leviticus learning the proper way to build said tabernacle. And as a side note, the latter half of the book of Exodus also comes from this P source, this priestly source. We return to Rabbi Held. He writes, "There seems to be an element of walking in God's ways here. Just as God has separated and ordered, so Israel must engage in separation and ordering. By dividing sharply between permitted foods and forbidden ones, Israel engages in something godly. But Israel does not merely imitate God by separating and ordering. Through its ritual life, it participates in the ordering of the world and thus in sustaining it. The tabernacle, the Mishkan, is nothing if not a tightly structured, highly ordered space. Who may enter, where, at what time, and in what garb is all tightly regulated. The profane must never spill over into and thus violate the sacred. The sacrifices are carefully choreographed and presented just right. In a chaotic, terrifying world, one place at least is governed by order and structure. This leads me to my final point, the beauty and interconnected web of our holiday calendar and Torah reading cycle. We always begin reading the book of Leviticus at the beginning of the month of Nisan. The building project described in the latter half of the book of Exodus in its time took almost a year to complete, and the building of the Mishkan was dedicated to begin its use in this month, in the month of Nisan. We began our life as a free people with the Exodus from Egypt, which we again are about to celebrate with Passover. And then at the same time, 1 year later, we began to offer korbanot, these offerings to God, in our newly completed traveling sanctuary. For all time, at this time of year, we remember our freedom from slavery, our freedom to serve God in our own special way. As Rabbi Held teaches, to read Leviticus is to enter a different kind of world, a small pocket of reality in which God's will is heeded and perfectly executed, in which chaos and disorder are kept at bay, in which, thus, God is already fully God, even as the realities outside fall painfully short of that long longed for dream, a dream of a perfect world. And my hope for us, for this community, for our nation and our world, is that in the days ahead we have more order than chaos, that we are gentle with ourselves when we miss the mark. My blessing is that we draw each other close as we make the sacrifices and offerings required to live together in holy community. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, and I hope you heard some of what I said with my son buzzing around. So we begin, we'll do a Chatzi Kaddish on page 184 in advance of the Musaf Amidah.
יתגדל ויקדש מרבה.
Amen.
מעמד יברך ירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וימיכון ובחי לכל בית ישראל בעגלה בזמן קריב וימרו.